Welcome to Naked Spirituality, a video blog series of sacred attention therapy and the Center for Human Awakening. My name is Rob Meager. For more information about sacred attention therapy, the Center for Human Awakening, and our video blog series, please visit our website at www.centerforhumanawakening.com. And center is spelled C-E-N-T-E-R. These video blogs support one of the Center's core activities, which is collaboration and partnership with individuals, communities, and healing centers practicing personal growth and spiritual development. And our guest today is Stefan Deutsch, and we'll be talking with Stefan about his healing work through the Human Development Company. And I'd now like to invite Stefan to come on screen. Hello, Stefan.
Hi, Robert. How
Hi.
you doing?
I'm well. It's nice to meet you, and thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
Stefan, where am I reaching you today?
Actually, I'm in San Diego visiting my grandchildren.
Oh, okay, San Diego, California, in the United
Yes.
States. Beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful. Are you originally from somewhere else?
Well, we live the majority of our time on Long Island
Okay,
in New York, and
okay.
I'm originally from Hungary.
Very good, very good. The last name Deutsch might suggest it would be European in origin.
Yes.
Now, Stefan, I recall now that we're connected, why I actually reached out to you. I remember it was a social media connection. It may, in fact, have been through Twitter. And I remember what drew me to you as a connection was mention of a theory of love. And I took a quick peek. I followed the link, and I thought, this is interesting. I'll invite Stefan to come talk with us. And I understand that this theory of love was something you developed 30 years ago.
Yes.
And to begin, Stefan, could you share with us, tell us about what is this theory of love?
I'd be very happy to. If you will allow me, I just wrote a very simple introduction to the community that would be listening, so they have a little sense
Sure,
of really where I'm coming from. So if you give me a second.
sure.
So because this is the Center for Human Awakening,
Yes.
my point of view basically is that humanity has been on a constant journey of awakening. 2 million years or whatever number we want to stick to it.
Sure.
And my work is part of that journey. It's another small part of our process towards understanding, feeling, behaving in the most supportive, loving ways towards ourselves and others. So in history, there have been groups of people who behaved very brotherly or peacefully, shared their resources with others. Unfortunately, most of these groups have been either annihilated or exterminated by less enlightened groups.
Mm-hmm.
Too many people and cultures have still not gained control over their base instincts. And one of the reasons for this is that the way their particular culture and society parents them. So it's not just parents that parent. It's our whole society and
Right.
culture.
Yeah.
You know, to hate, to distrust, to fear, to dominate, exploit, disrespect those who have a different color or language or religion or gender, nationality, even economic status, and so forth. So my life's work has been about how to overcome these base destructive instincts. Making people wrong about their beliefs certainly doesn't work, and even educating them can very often fall on deaf ears. So, you know, there is a saying, love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very powerful statement, certainly, but I see two problems with it. One is that it was written when one's neighbor often stole from or even killed another neighbor for his property and wives and whatever, his livestock.
Mm-hmm.
So we have come a long way from that being common. The way we need to rephrase that wisdom is love and befriend all human beings, not just your neighbor, right? Because we still live in tribes where people are the same color most often and have the same values and speak the same language. It's not that difficult to perhaps love them or be caring. The second problem, though, with what I see is love your neighbor as yourself, is that too many people don't love themselves. So then how do you love your neighbor if you don't love yourself, if you don't even like yourself, maybe even hate yourself? So how can we expect them to love their neighbor? My answer to controlling our base instincts is to teach people to love themselves unconditionally. So start with the individual and to apply that love to others, not out of weakness, as sometimes people hear the word unconditional, but strength. And that strength comes from knowing that every human being needs to be loved, and generally they're not getting enough love. So I just wanted to kind of say that before we kind of got into my particular theory.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, about 30 years ago, after having spent a decade having founded an organization called Impact on Hunger, which had to do with world hunger, and it was an education organization whose aim was to educate the American public to the solutions, not just the problems, and thereby having it be more supportive of frontline organizations. That's what we did. And so I had hunger and starvation in front of my eyes 24/7, literally. And one day I was sitting around after my work with Impact was complete, and what occurred to me was that when people didn't behave nicely towards me, that it hurt. And having majored in college in physics and philosophy, it just occurred to me that I didn't know what was causing this hurt. I mean, it seemed like their behavior, but how could someone's behavior cause a hurt in me, a visceral reaction, kind of like being punched, but I wasn't being punched. It was just this hurt. And I said, so something is causing this reaction. And I never heard an explanation. It's just, I grew up knowing when people weren't nice, it hurt. And I guess I came to accept it. In college, in graduate school, and after, I've never read or heard a discussion about why does other people's unloving or hurtful or not nice behavior have this visceral effect on us. And all of a sudden that question, it was like, you have to answer that question because it seems like we never even asked that question. Never mind answer that question. And I kind of sat around with it and I flipped and I said, but you know, when people are nice to me, it actually makes me feel good. I also have a visceral reaction to that. It kind of feels nourishing. It warms me. It energizes me. It helps me hop out of bed in the morning. And how could that happen when actually nothing was happening except another person's behavior? How could that not nice and nice behaviors have such a profound effect on me? And I sat around with this question, and what popped into my head is hunger and starvation, having spent 10 years being in it. And I knew that being hungry and being starved had a visceral, painful effect on a human being. We used to call it the silent killer because it was so debilitating that the person didn't even have the strength to cry out, to share their pain. And I said, you know, it almost feels like when people are not nice to me, like I'm being deprived of something like nourishment. I'm being deprived of, it's this pain and deprivation that I'm feeling. And when people are nice to me, it's almost like they're nourishing me, like they're giving me food And I said, what if this thing we've been calling love and a rose and the biggest mystery on the planet and connected with romance, what if it was much more like mother's nourishing love? Literally, not figuratively. The great psychologist Erich Fromm wrote in the 50s in a book called The Art of Loving that human beings are starved for love. Now, we never took that literally. It was a figure of speech, even though our collective experience is that we're starving. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this desperation to find relationships that were patient and kind and supportive and appreciative and accepting. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go with this and see where it leads me. Love is nourishment. I'm going to take it literally. What would that mean, for instance, in parenting? Well, when we look at other nourishments like air, food, and water, and by the way, let me just interject that in 2013, Barbara Fredrickson did an 8-year-long research study at the University of North Carolina, in which study she concluded that love is nourishment like air, food, and water. The only research so far, almost 30 years after I hypothesized the theory, but there it is for those skeptics who may be listening, although it's very much our human experience. So I said, if love in fact is nourishment, then let's take a look at parenting. And I know that in my family, I was lucky enough to have a mother who was unconditional, totally. But I had a father who was very conditional. And it was very painful. And I fought with him, and I was angry with him. And I had a hard time forgiving him until a little bit later in life. And I said, well, it seems most of us are probably getting some form of conditional love. And if we think about love as nourishment, well, that means malnourished. That means stressed and full of anxiety. Whereas I always had this peacefulness around my mother, because I knew that no matter what I did, that love wasn't withdrawn. Not for a second, not for a minute, not for a day, for an hour, a week. It just wasn't withdrawn. I was advised of my behavior that wasn't acceptable, but I never felt the love withdrawn. Different from my dad, where I felt the anger immediately and the temper, and it certainly felt like love at that moment was being withdrawn. So we give human beings, infants especially, but later on, air, food, and water unconditionally. So I said, well, the logic of it would mean we must give human beings, not just infants, children, and perhaps even adults, unconditional love. So I said, if love is nourishment, we're hypothesizing this, but if it is, every human being must have unconditional love throughout their life. Then I said, well, it's not that easy to teach people how to behave unconditionally. I mean, that's a goal. But for us to continually look for and wait for others to behave unconditionally is very challenging. I mean, that's how we form best friends, and that's what we look for in marriage, and we hope for from family, but the way we're trained is to behave conditionally, and untraining this is not something simple. So then I looked again at parenting, and I looked at nourishment, and I said, you know what? We teach human beings to be self-sufficient when it comes to air, food, and water. I mean, I have a 1.5-year-old grandchild and a 4-year-old. The 4-year-old now is self-sufficient. She not only eats by herself and drinks by herself, but she knows when she's hungry or thirsty. She goes to the refrigerator, she gets something, she asks for it. Of course, the 1.5-year-old doesn't, but we're training her to become self-sufficient
Mhm.
and not wait for someone in her environment eventually to feed her or to give her something or be responsive to the request.
Mhm.
Well, if love is nourishment, we're never taught self-sufficiency. Ever, never. So that means, in general, that we are at the um, at, that word is escaping me. Thank goodness that you'll be able to edit this out. But we are looking at the good graces of other human beings to give us this nourishment. We're constantly looking into our environment and waiting for that love, for that unconditional love that hopefully most of us got when we were infants. But again, people don't know how to do that. And so we get it conditionally. And it's painful, even from people who love us. And we know they love us, but we get it conditionally. And so there is this kind of up and down in the relationship. Sometimes we don't talk to somebody we love. We don't answer their call. We don't call them. We get upset with them. We raise our voice. And it doesn't make us happy, but this is the only thing we've learned
Mm.
by watching other people behave with each other instead of unconditionally.
Yeah.
When I teach my theory,
Mhm.
generally what comes up for people, and I'm assuming this is coming up now for your listeners about unconditional behavior,
Mhm.
that it kind of implies a weakness. It implies that we're going to be a doormat. In other words, no matter how someone treats us, how badly they treat us, we have to give them unconditional love. And the answer is a yes and a no. We have to give them unconditional love, meaning that we continue loving them, knowing that they're just doing the best they can, which at the moment is being very painful and very hurtful. And part of loving ourselves unconditionally, because that's the part of self-sufficiency,
Mhm.
we we actually have to learn to love ourselves unconditionally, even when we fail ourselves, even when we
Yeah.
make a mistake. Instead of the impatience and the criticism and
Mhm.
self-criticism and lack of self-acceptance and lack of
Yeah.
self-appreciation, we need to learn to do that
How do
because,
we how do we do that, Stefan?
well,
How does
we
one
actually
develop?
do. Yeah, that's the other question that comes up. Can you hold that thought for 1 second,
Sure.
Robert? How
Sure.
do we do that?
Yeah.
Because what I want to answer is that we have every right to say to someone who behaved hurtfully that what you just did was very hurtful, and in the same breath say, I know you didn't do that on purpose to hurt me. Because, and this is very tricky, and people have a lot of problems because it feels like somebody did something in order to hurt us, that they know better, that they're adults. And we're even hurt when a child of 3-year-old says, I hate you, mom. That hurts us too. And of course, they don't know better. We don't know better. This is the best we can do. And so when we say to someone, you hurt me and it's not acceptable, but I know you didn't do it on purpose to hurt my feelings. And if this relationship is important to you, please become more aware, more conscious, awaken to your behavior, because I might have to wind up loving you from afar. I will always love you. I'm always going to send you this nourishing energy, but I'm not going to put myself in the way of your unloving energy because it hurts.
Mm.
The fact of the matter is it hurts, and I love myself too much to accept that kind of behavior. Now,
Mhm.
I know this may not happen in a day or two.
Mhm.
You're not going to change, and I'm not expecting that. But
Mm.
I'm going to be watching whether you're trying. I'm going to watch if the next time you behave that way, whether you catch yourself and say you're sorry. And I'll be there to support it. So I'm
Mhm.
not going to walk away today or tomorrow.
Mhm.
But if it goes on and none of my pleas to you to stop behaving in this way or talk to me in this tone of voice or whatever it is, if it doesn't change over time and I don't even see you trying, then I'm going to love you from afar. Then we're going to take a break in this relationship and let you think about whether it's worth it. It may not be worth, the relationship may not be worth to you to make that effort. And, it'll make me sad, but I will accept it, and then we'll love each other from. So how do we do that? Because that's the next big question, Robert.
Sure.
How do we do this, people say? And I said, well, how many people here in the room have a best friend? Just about everybody raises their hand. There's somebody they consider, closest to them. It may be a sibling. It may actually be another person, a friend. It may even be a parent. Now, my father or my mother is my best friend. So, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but with this best friend, you're probably very impatient. You probably raise your voice. You're ultra critical. You don't appreciate anything they do for you. You don't accept them the way they are. And as I go on with this list of behaviors, people start to shout me down, so to speak. No, we don't do that. I don't do that. So, well, what do you do then with a best friend? And people say, well, I'm patient. I'm always there for them, and they can count on me. I appreciate if they do something for me. I said, okay. So you know how to be a best friend. You know how to behave actually lovingly and almost unconditionally with this person. How about you become your own best friend? And so how do we do that? And the way we do that is the first part of my theory towards learning to be an unconditional human being is awareness. So I have two long lists of behaviors. One we call nourishing and one we call unnourishing, loving and unloving. And I tell them, start to track your own inner dialogue. How do you talk to yourself? How do you behave with yourself? When are you being impatient, critical, unappreciative with yourself? So that's where we start. We start by correcting. And it's probably the hardest thing for us to be loving towards ourselves, because we've been trained so well, to actually be hypercritical. We don't like people who don't see their own flaws. It's okay to know our flaws. It's also okay to know our strengths, but it's how we react to those flaws. Do we say, look, I don't like that about myself, and I'm going to get everybody around me to, in a very nice, loving way, remind me when I behave that way so that I can begin to change. And I know it's not going to take a day or a week or even a month or maybe even a year, but I'll be moving in that direction. And as long as I move in that direction, I'll be happy with myself. So we train ourselves to be as self-sufficient, loving ourselves as we can. From there, we can then move on, because as we become more aware of self-talk, our inner dialogue, we also become more aware of the way we interact with other people. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I know I just raised my voice with you. You did this and I never said I thank you. We awaken. We become more aware of our behavior towards ourselves, our behavior with others, and then of course also their behavior with us. And once we understand that they need love because it's nourishment, and they don't know how to love themselves, so we're it. We and a small other group, we're it, to actually feed them this life-sustaining nourishment. Then we can say to them, listen, I know you love me. I know you care about me. That was very unloving, what you just did. And please, start to become aware. Put that behavior up on your refrigerator and notice when you behave that way with me. At least say you're sorry. For starters. So we train ourselves, we train other people. There's also a communication piece where I work mostly with couples where I explain to them they got married to get unconditional love because they haven't had it probably since infancy. And Science has now come in, Robert, big time in really providing the evidence for how much we need loving behavior towards ourselves, towards others, and from others, because and that it's not a romantic notion at all. Romance has everything to do with procreation. We're biological beings. We need to keep the species going. And what we call love is really adrenaline, dopamine, pheromones. These hormones make us couple and make us procreate, but they don't nourish us at all, at all. So the analogy I always use is the amusement park, the roller coaster. You can get on that roller coaster. It could be like the most exciting, so exciting you want to just get back on that roller coaster. It's kind of that feeling we have with romance. It's just so exciting, to touch someone or to have sex with them. And you just want, when you get hungry, you got to get off that roller coaster. You got to go to the food court. You got to nourish yourself. And that's what romantic love, if we want to call it, I just call it romance. That's what it does. It produces these hormones in us that are so exciting that we literally can't resist them, which is the whole idea. That's the whole idea of nature and biology, is to have this hormonal reaction to couple, to procreate. But it's mother's love, that love that goes to the infant, that creates oxytocin and vasopressin and endorphins, and these actually nourish us. These actually sustain our immune system. So when we're not being loving towards ourselves, our immune system is depressed. When we're not being loving to other people, our immune system is depressed. When they're not being loving with us, our immune system can falter. But if we are loving with ourselves and with others, the damage that other people's unloving behavior has with us is minimal. It's easier for us to accept them being imperfect and behaving in an inconsiderate, thoughtless, unloving way. It doesn't hurt us so much because we are well fed. We are, and then you have these analogies about putting it in your bank account, and emptying your bank account in terms of relationships with other people. When you do things for yourself, you're adding to your own bank account. And if you're just giving and never you exhaust that bank account. So I mean, people are familiar with concepts, but not necessarily that love is in reality and literally nourishment that we need to thrive. And the only person we can count on truly to be unconditional with us is ourselves.
Now, Stefan, if I can come in there and ask you about another theory.
Yes.
That the Human Development Company has developed, shares with people. It's called the continuum theory. Now, what is the continuum theory, and what is its relationship to the theory of love?
Right. Well, it gave birth to the theory of love, and it's back even before Impact on Hunger. Or actually about the same time, I was asked to create another organization called Creative Aging with Johanna Vandenberg, and I did that. And the experience of working with Creative Aging was that people were kind of upset about getting older. They didn't see any positives, and especially 40, where we have something we call the midlife crisis in psychology. And that after that, it's pretty much downhill. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt like, well, there's something wrong with this picture. What if we're just looking at, it's like, because everything is context and perspective. What if we just have the wrong perspective about this process, this lifespan we're going through? Because wouldn't it be much better for all of us if the way we thought about it was that it was just getting better and better and better and better and better, and we die? Well, I knew that as we get older, we are not as strong physically as when we're young. And we have these ideas about senior moments and forgetfulness, and of course there's some illnesses and death. So that wasn't lost on me. That is something that is real, and it seems like the only thing that we have to look forward to at this point, the way we conceptualize body and mind. We have this brain, we have a body, and those two things seem to kind of maybe fail us to a degree, and so why should we be excited about the rest of our lives after like 40 or something like that? And I said, well, the only way is if we could introduce an element or a concept that was still developmentally available, something that would promise the same kind of growth, and eventually I came up with the word power, the same kind of exponential power that the other two stages offered. Because we know that a 10-year-old wants to be 20. Why? Because a 20-year-old is so much stronger than a 10-year-old, taller and stronger and more coordinated, and their bodies have now come to their full potential. So we want to come to our full potential, right? So we look forward to being 20. We don't think we're 10 years closer to death. We think we're coming into a power, right? So then I said, well, in terms of, yes, of course we have a brain from the time that we're born, but something interesting happens when the body stops growing. It's kind of like the brain kicks in a different way. We literally become more mental beings. We call young people idealists. The word idea is in there. And we're much more interested in ideas than we were ever before. So you can talk about God and religion, or capitalism and communism, or poverty, or gender, or all of these, religion, all of these things are concepts. And young people become very interested in concepts. Obviously, one of them is, what am I going to be? Right? But that college is not coincidental. We don't send people to higher education right around the time they stop physically growing. It's because that is when they're most receptive to all of these ideas. Of course, one of the things about higher education is how you're going to make a living and be self-sufficient with air, food, and water. But in Europe, you have commercial high schools where people go and become electricians and plumbers and car mechanics. Not everybody goes for higher education like here. And they develop skills and interests that make them a very good living without having to put them through college. But that's a whole other issue. So I said, well, this happens. Back when I had the theory, the idea was that at 16 the brain stops developing. Now, with MRIs and all of these CAT scans and everything that we've learned to look into and inside and test, we have come to realize that the kind of thinking that we're able to do in our late 30s is not something that the brain can do at 16 or even in 20, that has to do with ethics and morality and all of these kinds of things. So I said, okay, perhaps midlife crisis is not a crisis at all. It's a third developmental phase, but something that is not part of our knowledge base. It's not something we prepare for. Therefore, it becomes a crisis. And then I said, well, one thing I know is that when human beings talk a lot about something and don't let go of it, there is some kind of reality base that probably shouldn't be ignored. Like, for instance, love, right? Shouldn't be ignored. And that is that we've consistently insisted that we're more than just a body and a brain. And we called it spirit, and we called it essence, and we called it being, and we called it self. We have a lot of terms for this other part, but we don't really, again, think of it literally. Some people do, but most people, science has disproven the existence of another part of us. I mean, where is it? How can you get your hands on it? Doesn't seem, you know, of course, science has also proven that the universe is not made up of earth, fire, air, and water. 2,500 years ago, uh, Democritus, a philosopher, postulated atoms. He called it atomos, tiny invisible things. And we didn't believe in tiny invisible things until the 1850s with the advent of discovering electricity. Now we could see things we could never see before. So physics has taken us way beyond atoms into quarks, into quantum physics, into all kinds of things. So we have no idea where that's going to end, right? In terms of what makes up reality. So the fact that we can't see spirit and being and these other things we talk about, I said, well, I'm going to posit that what we call self, because it's so much part of our language, spirit not as much, but self, talk about, right? Self-support, selfish, self-centered, self this, self that. We use the word all the time. What's the definition of self? So I said, I am going to hypothesize that self is real. Self is real. And it develops from birth, just like the brain and the body develop from birth, but it comes into its full potential at the age of around 40-ish. 40-ish. And by developing self, we become the most powerful versions of ourselves, truly the truly human versions of ourselves. And if we hold this as a lifespan theory, then for all our life, we have something to look forward to. We don't have to be worried about we're not as strong, or maybe even our memory is not as good or something, because we have something to look forward to. We can look forward to the developmental self. This truly powerful part of us. Because I said, if it's not powerful, people are not going to be that interested in what can self bring about in life, right? The other two, as you grow, you become more powerful physically, and as you educate yourself and use your brain, you become more powerful mentally. So here, you become more powerful. I said, well, how can I prove this? So one of the proofs is love. But I'm going to leave that till end. I wanted to prove that self was real. Otherwise, I just have a nice idea, and people have a lot of nice ideas. So who cares? Except for a few people who believe in your ideas. So I wanted to prove that self was real. And I said, well, what occurred to me was we already have history. And in history, we actually study 3 different groups of people. We study one group that was very physically powerful, either individually or in terms of creating an army, Hitler and Napoleon and Alexander the Great and Caesar and, Attila the Hun. We think of these people as powerful people. Or Samson, physically powerful, or exhibiting power, physical force, physical power. We learn about them, but we don't hold them in very high regard. We don't hold them in very high regard. It's very few of us want to emulate a Hitler. Again, unfortunately, there are, or Napoleon, or Stalin, or any one of these dictator type of people. Then there is another group of people that we study about. These people invented the printing press, Gutenberg and Madame Curie and electricity and the telephone and Bell and the Wright brothers with flying, and they used their brain. The second stage of development, they use their brain. And we study them and we hold them in much higher regard. Uh, uh, Many people want to invent something new, right? It kind of gets you fame and gets you money and maybe makes life easier for people on some level. So that's a second group of people that we study. And one of the things I call the second group is that they certainly made life easier. Not necessarily healthier or better. Healthier, yeah, in some cases healthy, but not necessarily happier. What they didn't necessarily make us a happier humanity, because look at the wars and look at all the things that are still going on and the way we treat our neighbor. So a step forward, right? Human awakening, a step forward. But so I said, but you know what? There's a third group of people that we study, and we didn't study them because they were so powerful physically or physical force, armies, and not because they were so like super intelligent. They weren't Einstein and Freud. It wasn't about, finding and discovering and everything like that. It's just we study them and we hold them actually in the highest regard of all the groups. I'm going to put it out to you, Robert, just out of curiosity. Can you think of who this third group of people that we hold in such regard?
Well, it might be the peaceful group.
And we have names for them, right? Moses and Jesus and Buddha and Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King. And like you said, and when we look at these people, they had much more of an impact on humanity than any other group. And we not just wanted to follow them, we want to emulate them. Because they brought ideas of peace, inner peace, peace among, love, Jesus. And so I said, well, maybe this is it. Maybe what the self is there for is to become a symbol, the human symbol of what these people wanted to represent to us, to follow. Peace, love, awareness, awakening. And when we listen, when we take a look at what they did, they had a vision for humanity that was loving. They communicated in a loving way. They didn't make us wrong. They tried to make us understand that there is something beyond what it is that we have, beyond material things and all of these kinds of things. So my theory, the continuum theory, says that we have 3 stages of development, that a human being is born with 3 separate developmental parts: the body, which we do a very good job, the brain, which we do a very good job, and at this point we don't think of a third part, the developmental self. That's the part we can bring to awakening. And the people who are awake, that's where they are. That's where they move to. And now I wanted to, again, this was a proof, but I wanted to still prove that this self was real. And I said to myself, what part of us hurts when we're not getting love, and what part of us is nourished when we're getting love? And no matter where I looked, I couldn't find a place, that was hurt when people weren't loving. It really wasn't my heart. I didn't go to a cardiologist. It wasn't my kidneys. It wasn't my liver, my intestines. It wasn't my brain. It doesn't have any pain receptors in there. So what part of me hurts, and what part of me is really nourished when people behave lovingly? And again, this is hypothetical that there is such a thing as a self, but I said love is the nourishment of self. And the part of us that hurts and feels so much pain when we're not getting love is this part, self. And so what aging offers human beings is to become unconditional as much as possible. Of course, it's a goal. it's a vision, it's a goal. But when we understand that human beings around us are malnourished, in need of love, constantly searching for unconditional love, and that this is something we can give for free as much as we want, then we begin to realize that perhaps children aren't our future. Perhaps it's this stage, fully potentialized, that becomes our future.
Mm-hmm.
Giving love to other human beings, whether it's our family, our friends, our community, our country, the world. We have a chance to really fulfill our potential as human beings, to really follow the Jesus and Mohammed and Buddha and all of these people, uh, and I don't know, maybe create paradise on earth, right? By loving everyone unconditionally.
I so
So, yeah.
I so appreciated how you began talking about the theory of love, of which the unconditional love was synonymous and symbiotic with that, and then how you talked about the continuum theory and how it circled back to its connection with the theory of love. And I wanted to ask Stefan, if people wanted to find out more about
Hmm.
the Human Development Company, to learn more about your mission, your mandate, your products or services,
Hmm.
how can they either reach out to you, or how can they find out more about the Human Development Company?
Right. So our website is four letters, thdc.org. It's a
Okay.
not-for-profit organization.
Okay.
The kinds of things we're doing are K through 12 curriculum to teach children, parents, and teachers
Okay.
this concept of unconditionality.
Okay.
Uh, we are doing a clinical trial at Danbury Hospital with doctors, nurses, to help them with stress and burnout, simply teaching them how to love themselves, to care a little bit more about themselves. So we have a number of different programs like these. They can go to the website, or they can just use my name, Stefan Deutsch, at msn.com.
Okay.
I welcome emails. I'll be happy to respond to an email, and it can be about aging. I'm doing a lot of work within the aging paradigm now. I was at the 7th International Conference on Aging and Spirituality in Chicago. I've met with the American Medical Association about, again, burnout in the medical profession. So there's a lot of interest in both areas, the continuum theory and the theory of love.
Stefan, I want to thank you on behalf of everyone watching and listening, and we'll make sure both the website address and your email is in the scrolling credits at the end. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and unconditional love to your members.
And to you. Thanks, Stefan. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.